Hello, I'm Jason with Path Coaching. Today I want to talk to you about NLP, and this is going to be just a brief overview of what NLP is, Neuro Linguistic Programming. It's a very wide field, and it's a field that I love and I've been studying for over 20 years, and I still find new aspects of it, and I still use ways to use the tools of NLP to grow in my own techniques that I use for clients. So like I said, NLP stands for Neuro Linguistic Programming. And it's a lot of words, but it's just basically a way of understanding how our brains work. NLP came about in the early 1970s, where actually two students were working together, Richard Bandler and Frank Pusilek, and they were both into studying Fritz Perls and Gestalt therapy. And they started to make up the original meta model, which is a very base of NLP, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And then as they wanted to expand it and learn how to be able to teach others, they actually got together with John Grinder, who was an associate linguistic professor at the time. And this was at UC Santa Cruz here in California, where I live. And so they put together this model, and originally it was around Gestalt therapy with Fritz Perls and Virginia Satir, which was a family therapist. And they used a technique called modeling. And modeling is basically finding someone who does something really well that you want to do and finding out what they do that you have to do to have that excellence and getting rid of what's idiosyncratic to them. So if they do something that's just specific to them that you don't need, you can get rid of it. And so they modeled that, and then they started with the first process that would lead to NLP. NLP is about using the language to access and change the unconscious parts of our minds that influence our thoughts, feelings, and actions. People use NLP in a lot of different ways for therapy, coaching, education, and business, and it's very powerful, all that. I mentioned modeling and starting off with Fritz Perls and Virginia Satir. As it went on, they used the work and worked with actually Gregory Bateson, studied the work of Albert Krzyzewski, Noam Chomsky, and the hypnotist Milton Erickson, which Ericksonian hypnosis is a large part of second stage NLP. And it's a huge part of it, using hypnotic language with NLP. The best definition that I have for NLP is using the language of the mind to get the results you want. And as we talk about the language of the mind, our language reflects how we think and feel. And NLP uses this to help us reframe negative thoughts and create positive ones. So a very typical reframe would be if you think about, oh, I failed. And you reframe it to, oh, I learned a way to not do that. And it's more positive. So it puts you in a positive mindset. One of the ways that we do this is we use a communication model for NLP. The interesting thing is that we have millions and millions of bits of information coming at us from our environment every second. And our unconscious mind can process 11 million bits per second. But our conscious mind can only process 50 up to bits per second. So it's a lot of information coming at us that we have to somehow process. And the NLP communication model is a way of understanding how we take in information and we respond to it. So we have filters. So the communication model, there's an external event that happens. It comes to us. We do a process calling delete, distort, and generalize. So we can't take in all that information. So we delete what we don't think is important. So right now, there might be sounds in the room, there might be colors in the room, there might be things going on, temperatures, feelings. You might not be aware of the feeling of the seat under you right now until I just mentioned it. And we delete those because it's not what we're focusing on. Then there's a distortion that happens too, is that our mind kind of tries to relay it, and that's part of the generalization as well, but it might distort what's coming into us. And that's also based on our filters and how we see the world. It's going to reflect internally what we see externally. And then generalize. The unconscious mind loves to generalize and say, oh, this is like that, and this is like that, and it groups it together, and it's easier for it to learn. One of the things with that model is that we teach people how to be aware of those filters, and then we work to change those filters if it's needed, if it's not serving you the best. Part of those filters are language, memories, decisions, metaprograms, values and beliefs, and attitudes, and we work with those. Through all of that, it comes in, we filter all that, and then we make an internal representation inside. of what that event actually happened. That leads to our state, how we feel, how we present ourselves, and then that makes our behaviors. So it's kind of a long process, but that's the basis of the communication model and how we work it with NLP. In NLP, we have presuppositions of NLP as well. And that's kind of basic principles that are guideposts on how we approach life. Some of the examples are from Krzyzewski. This one is, the map is not the territory. Meaning that, if you look at a map of a mountain and you think about climbing the mountain, that's not that mountain. So the map, being our internal representation, is not what's really happening outside. It's our impression of what's happening outside. The other one that I really like is, there is no failure, only feedback. That's earlier, like a free reframe I was talking about earlier. And the one there's 14 total, I'm not going to go through all of them, but the one that I like the best is respect for the other person's model of the world. When a client comes to me, I respect where they're at. I respect what they think and what they feel. I might not agree with it, but I honor that that's how they feel, and it's their model of the world. And then if it's holding them back in a way, we can help them change that. And all of these presuppositions of NLP, they're just really principles that help us be more resilient and adaptable in the face of challenges. I mentioned before that one of the original tools of NLP was the meta model. And at first it started with Fritz Perls, took the work of Satir, and it's a set of tools for understanding language and uncovering hidden beliefs and assumptions. One of the things that we look at in NLP is listening to language and how people represent their world. There's what we call the surface structure of language and the deep structure of language, meaning the surface structure is, as an example, the word dog. So we all kind of can agree what the word dog means at the surface level. But at a deep level, we all have a different definition. So if you grew up around loving pets and had dogs and they were your friends and you loved them and they were great, when you think of dogs, you have a good feeling. If you had a negative experience with a dog, preferably when you were young, you might have a negative connotation around dogs. And so your deep structure of dog might be that. So you might be like, I don't know why I have issues with dogs at the surface level, but at the deep structure, that's where the issue comes from. And that's part of what we do is in NLP practitioners, master practitioners, etc., is help you find that out. And by using the meta model, we can gain more clarity and insight into ourselves and to others. So the meta model is really about specific language. And a couple examples that I wanted to read to you is, so I mentioned earlier about delete, distort, and generalize. They kind of fall in these categories for these questions when we look at language. Distortions, one of them is the categories is mind reading. So if someone was to say, oh, you don't like me. So in the meta model, the response could be, how do you know I don't like you? And what that does is recovers a source of information. So it makes them get more specific about their thoughts. A generalization, the question or the statement might be, she never listens to me. And the response could be never, or what would happen if she did? And that recovers counterexamples, effects, and outcomes of that language. And the last one would be like a deletion. One is that you might have heard in the workplace before, someone might say, there's no communication here. And the response could be, who's not communicating what to whom? Or how would you like to communicate? And it turns it back into a process and recovers the deletion, and it finds it. So there's a series of questions. There's 5 for distortions, 2 and some subcategories for generalizations, and 2 with subcategories for deletions as well. But it allows us to really look at the deep language and find out what's going on. And by using the meta model, we gain more clarity and insight into ourselves and others, as I was saying. It's something to really be specific about what's really going on in our lives. There's also a thing in NLP called the Milton model, where the meta model is very specific language. The Milton model, which is based on the work of Milton Erickson, it's very abstract. And these are a series of questions to produce trance and to really get agreement. So at one time, there was a theory talked about NLP that a lot of the techniques are just keeping the conscious mind busy while we do work with the unconscious mind. Because the unconscious mind, or as some people call it, the subconscious mind, is where the change happens. The next section I want to talk about NLP that we work with is modalities and submodalities. And our brains process information through different channels like seeing, hearing, and feeling. So in NLP, we talk about the technical terms are visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, gustatory, and then there's an auditory digital, which is our thoughts. So like it said, our sights, what we hear, what we feel, both on our skin and both in our emotions. Somewhat olfactory and gustatory, so smell and taste, somewhat they use that when we work with things like if someone loves something a lot and they don't want to love it so much, like a food or something, we can change the smell, how they interact with the smell of it, things of that nature. So NLP helps us understand how we use these channels and how we can use them more effectively. And by paying attention to the details of our sensory experiences, we can make changes at a deeper level and achieve better results. So modalities are, like we talked about, visual and auditory, and submodalities are the distinctions within those, which that means, so let's say we're talking about visual modality. So you saw something. Well, the submodality of seeing something could be, is it a color or black and white? Is it a clear picture? Is it fuzzy? Is it near to you? Is it far? And this is how we label things inside our minds. This is how we know things. We have pictures of them in our unconscious mind. And that's working with the modalities and the submodalities. And that's a subject I love to talk about. I actually have a couple videos out on it, and it's really good for doing change work. Something else we talk about in NLP is values and strategies. NLP can help us identify our core values and use them as a compass for our actions. So values are just what's important to us. So if you're coming to talk about your career as an example, the question would be to elicit your values would be, in the context of your career, what's most important to you? And what's important to you? And what's important to you? And we would elicit all those values and find out what's important to you. And then we would actually have you put them in order. And in early NLP and strict NLP, values are kind of referred to as criteria. And so you would have highly valued criteria, but we talk about them as values now. And so you can imagine how that would help you. So say you're not making the money you want to in your career, and we elicit your values around career, and turns out that money's not in your highest values or in your higher values. That could be an issue. So if you wanted to have that be a higher value, we can help you move that value higher up. And strategies are just that, strategies. We all have ways that we accomplish everything. We have strategies for everything we do in our lives. And it starts off with, is it a thought that we have, and then it leads to an action. One of the strategies that we use in training, because we all shop, so it's easy for everyone, is a buying strategy. So there's talk about a client that she was buying too much, and so elicited her buying strategy, and it's like, oh, well, I go in a store, I see it, I love it, I buy it. You could see how that could be a challenge, right? And she bought a lot. So what was missing was for her to stop and say, do I really need this? Do I really want this? Is this something that I should buy? So you can install that step in the strategy. So see it, love it, ask yourself, is this something I really need? Do I really want it? And if yes, then you would buy it. So you could see how an error in a strategy could lead you to that. So overall, NLP is a powerful tool for improving communication, understanding ourselves and others, and achieving our goals. And by learning more about NLP, we can unlock the potential of our minds and create the life we want. There's a lot of information I gave you now, and there's a whole lot more. So if you're interested in learning more about NLP, please reach out. It's something I'm very passionate about, and I love to talk about it, and I would love to go more in depth with you. It's Jason with One Path Coaching. Have a great day.